All right. So yeah, just go ahead, open up iTerm and cd into where you need to go. I'm going to make a directory. It's going by quick. So for today, we're not going to do anything with Rails. This is just, we're just going to do just a React project. So I'm just going to do a yarn create React app. We're going to do our counter. Well, I guess while this is building, I can create a Git repo on GitHub. Seems to be taking a second.
Hey, James, when I tried to yarn React to React app counter, it says couldn't find a package.json file. What do I need to do to fix that?
Did you? That shouldn't be asking for it. Did you run this specific command yarn create React dash app?
Yeah, I did.
Mine threw up a command failed error as well.
Do you want to share your screens or let's?
I'll try it one more time. I'll go into a different thing. Hold on. What was it? Yarn.
I'll throw it out in Slack.
I think it's gonna work actually. So sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Spelled something wrong.
Yeah, this command should be working for all of you because this is the same command you did, yarn create React app. This is how you create your client folder in your Rails projects. So who else, was someone else having a problem? Did you try it again and get it working?
I added the counter to it, but it failed like midway through. So it said that it was successful with create React app, but then it had an error. So I'm running it again and I'll see if it does anything this time.
Okay, let me know if that doesn't work because definitely want to make sure everyone can get this set up. Cool. Sorry, let me finish creating this repo. Cool. Open CD into counter. So CD into that project we just made. So yeah, just a little React review. This is our command we use. It's kind of like the Rails new. We're just creating a React project. I'm going to add a remote.
You want to share your screen, James?
Oh, thank you. Have I not been sharing this whole time?
You did at the beginning and then you turned it off.
Okay, I'm not sure why I turned it off, but thank you. Cool. So I have my added my remote. I can always do just an initial commit. So nothing to commit. Cool. All right. So I'm going to open this up into code. Here we go. So let's, I think what I want to do is, so we're going to do a counter, but we're going to do it as a class component. Let's just quickly make a component functional counter so we can kind of see them. We can have two different examples of it. So I'm going to call this counter func.js. Import React from React. And we're going to do a counter. So I'm going to want to grab the use state hook. So this is like what we did the first day when we learned React. Const counter. So yeah, this is just what is called a functional component because it is just a function, right? That is a JavaScript function right there. For this one, you know, we're gonna want to also let's have this take props too, because let's actually be able to give our counter a header. Cool. And then we want some state. So I want some like to keep track of the count. A way to set that state. So that's going to be our set count. Use state. And I'm going to have this just start off at 0. Yeah, we can just have a paragraph. Count. It's going to be the count value. And then we can have like a button here. Or add. On click. We can do our set count to be count plus 1. What's actually going to happen here if I like just look at this line 9.9? What am I actually doing here? Or what's kind of like, just try to imagine like I render this component. What's going to happen to count this count state?
Go up by 1.
Go up by 1. And then what's that going to do after it goes up by 1?
Re-render the component.
Yep, it's going to re-render. And then what's that going to do? It's going to change the count by 1 again. It's going to re-render. So this is going to kind of infinitely count. So to avoid that, I can wrap this in a function that returns this function call. So it doesn't call when it renders, it calls when it's clicked. Then I can just export default.
Why would it call when it renders if it's part of the on click?
Because with JavaScript, this is even it's on the on click, but this is actually going to call it's JavaScript is like going to run this function. It's going to run it to completion because it's saying, hey, call this function. And it's kind of like the same way if I had a paragraph and inside of here, I had 1 plus 1. You know, it's not going to render 1 plus 1. Like JavaScript's going to perform this math and it's going to render 2. It's the same thing with a function. Even though it's a on click, it's going to see that this set count function is being called and it's going to run it. Really what I want is I want this on click to be equal, like it's kind of just here's the function I want you to call when it's called, when this button's clicked, but I don't want to put the parentheses there, right? So that's normally how you want to do this. So I'm saying on, hey, when this button's clicked, let's use that set count function. But just don't call it now, call it when it's clicked. But this one, since I wanted to change the value of count, I have to like add it as a parameter. So now I have, like now it's calling it, but I don't want that to happen. So what I do is I wrap it in a function that returns this function call. Is that starting to sink in a little?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. This took to actually like understand what's going on here took me pretty long. I don't know, like, but once it like clicked, it clicked. But it really is. Remember, you can have a function, some func that can return a function. That's kind of what I'm doing here. Cleaner way to write that is just like that. Cool. Let's actually, sorry, but you know, another way we could write this is I could throw this in its own separate function and just call that there. That would also work. See, now here I'm not calling the add function, I'm just giving it a reference. And then in my add function, that will call, it set count plus 1. Is this grayed out? I have an extra thing there. Okay. Cool.
When
So
you do
now-
it that way, why don't you have to call it for the add function? Like
Because-
as in on click add parentheses calling the function.
Yeah, I don't, well, first of all, I don't want to call it because I don't want it to be called. The reason I don't need to call it because this doesn't take any parameters. So because I don't want to call it, I just want to say, hey, here's the function to run when this button's clicked. When I had it down here, the set count, see, I actually need to actually pass this a parameter, right? I can't just say set count because set count needs a argument. So I need to pass this something. Well, now I would get stuck in the infinite loop, or where, yeah, I would just continually add and we get in an infinite loop there. So to avoid that, I say, hey, let's have this on click now is a function that returns set count plus 1. Just kind of leave there. That is another way to write that. Cool. Is this still syntax still a little confusing? I can like, what I could do is like go into a different JavaScript file. Let's just do that. I think kind of get out of React land and just look at a JavaScript example of this. Okay, so let's say I have some function. Oh no, I'm just going to call it foo. Here is my function. this is going to return a function. Right, I can have a functions in functions in JavaScript they're called their first class citizens, meaning you can you can pass functions to functions, you can have functions return functions. So you can just treat them like you would any other data structure. So what I can do here is I'm going to say like let bar equal foo. If I console.log, and let's not have this console, I'm going to just have this actually return the string hello. This is actually, I'm going to make this a little confusing on purpose. Okay, what is this going to return? Or what is this going to log, I should say?
It's just gonna log a function, isn't it? But not like actually return hello.
Yeah. So let's run this. So I could do node, and let me make sure it's saved. Node demo, node demo.js function foo. Like this is, this foo function returns this function. So I'm storing this return value into the bar variable. So this one's a little tricky too. Well, first of all, so how do I then get this to say hello?
Put an argument in there.
No, it's not, it's close. It's not an argument. I just need to call it. So here's my function. That is the function. That's not me calling the function. When I do the parentheses, now I'm saying, hey, do the work. And notice this is a difference between Ruby and JavaScript. With a Ruby, if you have just this line of, like if you have a function and you just have it like this, it will run the function. With JavaScript, it's not going to run the function. So this is nice because I can like store functions into variables and pass them down and not have them run.
So that's just something you can't do in Ruby.
There are like ways to do it. It's not like straightforward though. It's not like this, but there is a workaround. But so if I run this, I'm getting function anonymous.
Because there's another function inside foo.
Yeah, so if you have an anonymous function, that's this function. And actually I kind of screwed this up, but this is a good screw up. What am I actually doing right here? After what I just said, let me ask you this question. Is bar foo or is bar the function that foo returns?
Bar is foo.
Yeah, bar is just foo. That's why when it's logging right here, it's saying function foo. Because here on line 7, I'm just saying let bar equal foo. Right? If let's just do a simpler example. Like let bam equal 1. then baz equal bam. What is baz?
Bam.
Yeah, and what's bam? It's just one, right? Console.log. If I console.log log baz, that's just going to be one. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm saying let bar equal foo. And then so when I'm logging bar, it's just another name for this function. Just taking this function and getting it a different name. So now if I actually call the function, now foo is going to return the anonymous function. So let me also just add this so we can like see in our log, just so it's a little more clear for us. Okay, so now my bar is the function anonymous. So why this is called a anonymous function is because it doesn't have a name. See, my function foo does have a name. So bar, so here when I call bar though, it's returning undefined. Why is bar returning undefined? Wouldn't you expect this to be hello? Because I'm saying let bar equal foo, which is now this anonymous function. And so then when I call this function, it should be returning hello, right?
Hello is not being returned.
Yeah, I'm not returning hello. So now when I do it, there's my hello. So I can have a function return a function, and that function can return whatever. That function can return a function. So now if I had this if I had this like 3 levels, so let's say let bar equal foo. Well, now bar is this function. So then I could say let, I don't know, I'm running out of these words. Foo bar, baz, bam, shazam, equal bar. And I could console.log shazam. How do you spell shazam? Shazam. And then let's actually call that. So I could have a function, return a function that returns a function that finally returns hello. I would, but it's not that much. It's, you know, it's kind of doing something similar. I can just, you know, have a variable equal to a value. It can be a string, it could be a number, it could be an array, but, you know, with JavaScript, you know, we can set variables equal to functions, and those functions can return functions. functions, let's just do another, let's do one more example. And then I'll slack this out and you can kind of look at this later. Let's go with X, just naming these poorly on purpose. Let's have this return X. So I can have a function that takes a function as a argument. That blew up. Z is not defined. Oh, I called it X. So, and I think someone was asking this. I think this will maybe show this a little well too. Okay, so. And like I said, I'm trying to like just make these names kind of unreadable on purpose because it really kind of forces you to like think about like what's actually going on here. So let's look at this example. I have this const b, it takes some parameter c and it just returns it. So let's do that. B test, I don't know, equal B X and call the function. Let's call this A test. A test and B test. I kind of want to try to get this all on the same so we can see all of it. Okay. So let's look at this. So X is a function that just returns the string X. Y is a function that takes this parameter called Z and it returns whatever Z returns. So it's kind of expecting Z to be a function, right? Because it's treating it like a function. It's going to call it like it's a function. Then I have this B function that takes a parameter and just returns it. So my A test, I call the Y function and I pass it X. So I call the Y function, which is just the function that gets, a function. So I pass it the X function. I don't call it, I just pass it the function. And then the Y function will call it, and then that return value will get there, right? So this will be X. With this case, I have my B function. I pass it X with parentheses. So that actually runs the function right there. And that function's going to evaluate before B is even called. So X evaluates. So X, remember, is just a function that returns X. So really what's going to happen is this is going to evaluate. It's going to return that string X. And then we're going to call B. And so what's B is just a function that takes in a argument and returns it. So that is also going to be X. Let me put that back to how it was. Let's just double check to make sure we're right. There we go, 2 X's. Now, like I said, I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. Like these functions are, dumb functions. They're not doing any, they're like being very simple. But it's kind of illustrating what's the difference between passing a function, and passing a function, a function that's being called. Because this is going to evaluate, it's kind of like having that parentheses in there. It's going to it's like having the 1 + 1, like it's going to figure out what that is. So it's going to evaluate that expression before it does B. But with JavaScript, we can also just pass a function, and then that function can call it inside of the function, like we're doing in line 24 through 26 with function Y. So there is a little on functional, kind of on JavaScript, but this is also just like a kind of more high level, on functional programming. And when you have a language like JavaScript that allows you to pass functions to functions and let functions return functions. So I would say maybe I'm going to throw that in Slack. I think if you type this out, you kind of go through some examples on your own, forget a return word. That's really how I think it starts to settle in. So when you type it out yourself and have those aha click moments. Is this, how would you say, how much sense is this making? On a scale of thumbs up to thumbs down? Got a couple, cool. Sweet. And yeah, if it's not, just go through this a whole bunch and it'll click.
We can do this on our own, but so in your example here for your demo, you have them both returning X, right? Could you show us an example in which there would be a difference in the output based on whether you called the function or passed a function through another function, so that they didn't return the same thing, and the only difference was, I guess, how you passed it through?
Yeah, if I did that, what would that return?
B of X, wouldn't that still return X because you're pushing X, which is returning X through B?
So this returns the string X. If I log this, it's going to be the string X. If I log, let's do this one, C test. If I log this one, what is this going to be?
Would it log the function, function something?
Yeah, this would be the function, and I believe it's called X. And we can test that out. So, but yeah, that's how you could change that. What if I did, let's do one more, just since we're on the same page, just to see kind of this other example. So here I run X, which returns X, and then I pass that to Y. What's going to happen here? That is going to be a error. I'll give you that hint. Why is this going to be an error?
Y is expecting a function, not a string.
Yeah, because what this is going to do is, this is going to It's the same thing if I called y with a string. Yeah, so it's y is expecting this z to be a string. So you can't just do a string x and then call a function on that string. Like that's not valid. So that would be an error. So if I run this, there's my error. You know, z is not a function. So what it's saying, z is not a function because it's the string x. So that's an error. So I think this was a good tangent. I think this is really important to understand. So hopefully, and like I said, some of this can sometimes take some time and just going through it a whole bunch, but hopefully it's starting to sink in a little more. Cool. So now, you know, maybe like after looking at this, we can kind of start to see like what the difference between add and that is. So cool. But here, nonetheless, is our basic React counter example. So if I want to render this, I'm going to go to my app.js. Let's do counter. I don't think I exported default. Oh, I did. Counter. Counter func. Okay. And you know, I can give this, we gave it a header prop. Like it's functional. I can do the same thing with this one. Just give it a different header. So I need to start my server to check that out. Yarn start. Static, throw up a page. There we go. So I have my props, my header props coming through. So I have different titles. And then these components have their own state. So I can click this add. And there we go. Pretty cool. Right, that's kind of what we did when we first started to learn about React and state and props. So we use this counter functional example. So there's another way to write this. It's called a class component. Have any of you like happened to like on Stack Overflow or just online, you have seen components written a different way? I'm sure you have. So there's another way to write these. So I'm just going to name this counter class. So we can write React components as classes. So let's do that. So I'm going to, maybe I'll just even take this, just so we have like the code right here so we can like look at it. I'm just going to comment this out just so it's here. Okay. So how to do a class component is, and we briefly talked about classes in Ruby. Remember in Ruby, we could do like a class person and then end. We have like a person class. So classes, JavaScript has classes. This syntax right here is actually ES6. This wasn't available until 2016 to write classes like this in JavaScript. So it's a semi new feature in JavaScript to write classes like you normally would in an object-oriented language. But So I'm going to do class and then the name of my component, counter class. Then I'm going to use this word extends react.components and then curly brackets. You know, from our our Ruby days or like using classes in Ruby, it's class user. So it's very similar stuff that's going on here. It's just a little different syntax. So they both use the class, then you give it a name. Ruby has this arrow symbol to, this is essentially saying extends. It's just a shorthand. All other languages I've seen it like it's extends. So what I'm saying is the counter class extends React component. What does that allow us to do? Can you kind of remember from Ruby, what's the significance of inheriting or extending a component?
You get all the functions and variables from the parent component.
Yeah, so now all of a sudden, my counter class, this, what I'm creating is now a React component. So yeah, it's going to get all that built-in functionality from the React component class. So let's export default counter class. So I'm just going to leave it like this because I kind of want to go through the first error we'll see. So I just have a blank class. This is valid JavaScript. That's all valid code. So I can now do like counter class. Make sure I import that. So I'm going to use it the same way. So when you're using a component, you're not going to know if it's a class or functional component. When you render them, they behave the same way. There's no way I can tell this is a functional component and this is a class component other than their name. So they're going to act the same that way. If I inspect, so this isn't rendering, kind of expecting there to be an error on here, but where is it? Let's see if we can get it up here. There we go. So what this is saying is instance.render is not a function. Now, when you define, and this is something in JavaScript and Ruby, this is an object-oriented programming thing. What this is saying is when you inherit from a class, these classes can sometimes make you define methods if you extend them. Like if I'm a human class and I extend mammal class might force me to have a method called breathe. Now I'm going to define how I breathe because I breathe differently than say a whale breathes, but I still breathe. Like a whale breathes, all mammals breathe, right? But we breathe a little differently. Or like a mammal class could define like a speak method. I think all mammals like speak or communicate, but we communicate in different ways. So the mammal class says, hey, there's going to be a communicate method, but you have to define it because like a mammal's not really a thing. Like it can describe a category of things. So that's what React's saying. It's saying, hey, you need to define this render method. So within my class, I go define the render method. If I save that, now it's a different error. Your render method should have a return statement. Okay, return. And this is where we can return our stuff. And there we go. There's like a basic class component. We have to extend from React component. We have to define a render method, and that render method is going to return our HTML or JSX. Sweet. So let's move on to the next portion. How do we get props here? Well, with the class component, we get it through this. Let's get into this keyword, this dot props. So with a functional component, we add that as our parameter, just this props parameter. And we could technically call this anything, just as long as we use that same word there, because it's just a parameter in a function. With a class component, it has to be called props, and you have to get it off of this. So this is going to refer to this instance of the class. Because with components, we can have multiple of them, right? And like I said, we're going to pass props the same. As far as when we render the components, we pass props the same. But to get props, I'm going to say this dot props. What do you think I need to say next?
Dot header.
Yeah, dot header. This dot props dot header. So hey, get this instance components, get their props, and then pull off the header. And there we go. So there is that's how we pass props, and that's how we access props. But they both have props. It's like I said, one of the nice things is it's like you can't tell the difference when you use them. So what about state? How do we get state? Let me see. Let me show you one way. This is kind of like one way. I would say a little messy, or not messy, like a little more code. It's through our constructor. And I'll say this, from that little time we did object-oriented programming in Ruby, the constructor is like the initialize method. It gets called when the component is created. Don't get created, not mounted. That's a different term. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a console.log. I think this helps to throw in logs. Constructor called. And we'll also throw on in the render method. Render called. So I'm getting this there, must call superconstructor be in class. So let's do this method takes props, and this is just like a React thing. Well, so first of all, this super thing, does anyone remember what super does? That was in Ruby. kind of sounds funny, super props. Super calls the parent, whenever you use the super keyword, it's going, or the super function, it's going to call the function in the parents class. So calling super props here, this will call constructor why am I spelling this wrong? Constructor in the React component class. So this is just a React thing you have to do. Call super props, give it that, and now it's working. But notice when I clear this, I refresh, we get my constructor called, my render called, my constructor called, my render called. Why is this getting logged twice? It's getting called twice because I'm rendering two of these components. So for each one, for each of those components, it's going to call the constructor and then call the render. And the order is important. The constructor is always going to be called first, and then the render gets called. Cool. So inside of here, I can set up some state. Some initial state. So I'll say this. Set up initial state. This dot state equals count 0. So now I can go ahead and grab that state. Count is going to be, well, it's this, get this component, get its state, and now pull off the count value. So now I have some state. Let's do a button just like we did in the last one for add. Click. I'm going to create an add function, but I now need to use this keyword, this dot add, because I'm in a class. So if I want to access, like if I want to define a function, I can do it right here. So I'll define my function. Notice how I'm not using const in front of this one. Since I'm in a class, I don't use const. I just define my function. Let's just do this, console.log add called. Just make sure that's rendering. Oh, I should put some text here. Add. Click that a couple times. So now add is being called. All right. So now we can set the state. So we don't have our hook. So I'm going to do this dot set state. Now this dot set state, this is a React method, set state. This is how I can change my state. So it's a function, and this function, I'm going to give it an object, and the object's going to be the new state. So I want count to be whatever count plus 1 is. Say this. When you call this method, No, it changes state. And recalls the render function. So set state is a lot like our set other state methods in a functional component, where when you call this function, it's going to trigger that function to be re-rendered. And in this case, when we call set state, it's going to call this render function again. Oh yeah, count is not defined. So count is not defined. I need to grab it from state, this dot state dot count. So I'm setting count value to my count key to this dot state dot count, and then adding 1. So grab the current value, add 1 to it. Click add. I'm going to clear my console. So notice when I click add, add's called and then render's called. So we change our state, then we re-render. That is, yeah, so that's now working the exact same. So this one's a functional component and this is a class component. They both work. So first of all, why are there 2 different ways? Which one's better? Why am I teaching functional? So let's answer some of those questions. So first, let's talk about why we have class components and why we have functional components. So, and what hooks allows us to do. So first of all, let's just say this. Before hooks, which I don't know, when did hooks come out? I'm gonna Google this. When did React hooks come out? Yeah, okay, so 2019. So before hooks, you know, if you wanted state, or lifecycle methods, we'll kind of talk about those, you know, component, did mount, update, etc. So before hooks came out, if you wanted to have state or you wanted to have lifecycle methods, you had to use a class component. There were still functional components around, like, so those have always been there. But before hooks, if you wanted state or any of these lifecycle methods, you had to use a class component. But then in 2019, React came up with, you know, a pretty big feature of hooks. So now that you have hooks, then you can actually, and we've seen this, we can now have state in a functional component, right? With our use state hook. And how do we have lifecycle methods? I know we haven't really talked in depth about lifecycle methods, but what hook allows us to do lifecycle methods?
Use effect.
Yeah, the use effect allows us to do the lifecycle methods. So that was, yeah, I mean, and you know, that's fairly recent, 2019. I mean, that's approaching 3 years. So I think, you know, that hooks are becoming definitely more and more common. But I'm sure as that's still not that much time. It's starting to get there, but I'm sure it's like many of you have seen, like, trying to figure out like problems. When you see examples, you see class components, right? And then you're like, what the hell is this? And you can't really read it. So I'm going to, we're going to do a little, like today's homework will be with class components. And we'll do like some CRUD stuff with class components just to get some examples. I'm going to always probably mainly, I would say from here on out, still like 80–90% of the time do functional components. I think they are cleaner. I don't know if you agree or disagree. I think you can write them generally with a little less code. You can, hooks are like a really nice feature. There's also a rule, now that we know what class components are, hooks can only be used in functional components. So if you want to use a hook, you have to use a functional component. Hooks do not work within a class component. So if you're using something like, React router and you want to use the use params hook, well, you have to make your component functional. Now React router is going to have, there's different ways to get it to work with a class component, but a lot of these new libraries that are coming out, like, because hooks are a cool feature, you can write your own hooks. They're probably start relying more and more on hooks. So I think functional components are going to be, kind of preferred. But also at the same time, like I said, it's kind of a newer feature. So let's say you go work for a company and their code base is like 5 years old. Or you could be like, I know my last company I was working at, we wanted to upgrade to React because we wanted to use hooks, but it was such a pain to update, they never did. I don't know if they have yet, but hooks had been out for like a year and they still hadn't updated their React version to be able to use hooks. So it's likely you might go into a company if you go like do React stuff, which I think is likely, that you're going to see class components depending on how old the code base is. Because if you have, I think one thing that's probably going to be a little shocking to you when you get your first job is how big projects are, like how many like React components there are. It's not like, people are going to rewrite all of these files just from a class to functional components, because that would take forever. So they might just leave these older components as is, and maybe as they're adding new components, then write those as functional. So you might get like a little bit of a mix. But I do think I think by the end of the course, when you're feeling pretty comfortable with just functional components, really going to a class, like switching between the two is not that hard. So that's kind of why I just really focus. I think it can be a little confusing to try to learn both at the same time. You do have to I think it helps to know, because we're going to start seeing some examples like in Semantic Ui React where it's like a class component. So you kind of have to know the gist of it, but I'm going to focus on, I mean, minus today. Today's all going to be class components, but as we move on, I'm still probably going to do like I said, 80–90% in functional components. But can you see how they are pretty similar? They both have state, they both have props, they both have lifecycle methods. I need to shut my window, but I'm going to shut my window. Let's take a break. Come back at what time? 11? No. Yeah, let's call it 10:55. I'm gonna shut my window.
Hey, James, my terminal, when I try to run node in there, it gives me an error that says module not found.
Okay, you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
This is probably like you're not importing something would be my guess, but did you have it working at one point?
No, it hasn't been working today. I was just following along.
Okay. So this,
Ruby, I had the same thing and I had to redefine my path to like node and then like ./src/demo.js.
So what was it again? /src.
Yeah, because the demo component lives in your src folder.
Oh, okay. Right.
yeah, when I was doing that, because yeah, you just defined that in a different folder. When I was doing it, I had it in my root folder.
Good. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Thanks.
cool. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. One thing I just want to show, we're going to move on to a different example, but I do want to show a couple things with this example. First of all, we've always been using arrow functions, and I've always said, you know, they can be thought of as the same, because there's a couple different ways you can write functions in JavaScript. I just want to show you this. So we have this working, right? If
Can
click
you share your
add.
screen?
Oop, thank you so much. When I click add, it's working. And you know, we have add as an arrow function. But I'm going to copy this. You know, I can write this also like this. It's just a function. This is another way to write a function. No, this is like the function add. I don't, since it's a class, I don't need the function keyword, but if it was outside of the class, that's how I'd write this. But so you might see code like this, where the function's written like that. It's not breaking anything, but now when I click add, now all of a sudden this is different. So what's happening now is we're getting this weird error, can't read properties of undefined reading set state. Now, so what's going on is this keyword is something what we kind of don't think it is. So if I console.log this, click add, get the error. Notice how this is undefined. It's kind of, it's a weird thing that happens when you have functions that are bound to like event listeners. So that this can is no longer this instance, it's something, you know, it's undefined. So what you can do, if you want to do it this way, you can say this dot add equals this dot add dot bind this in your constructor. So, and yeah, this is where I hate this keyword, because I end up saying this so many times. But in the example here, this add, that is referring to the function here. And what I'm setting it equal to is I'm just setting it equal to the same function, but I'm going to bind this keyword. So now if I go back and do it, click add, now it works. Because in my constructor, I'm saying, hey, bind this to this dot add. So now this is defined. Yeah, so you can do it that way, or the other way to do it is you just use an arrow function. So if you use the arrow function, then this keyword's kind of bound as you would expect it to. So I kind of wanted just to show you that example. So I think if you just want to avoid that confusion of, you know, binding this, or because it doesn't always break. It, like I said, it's really when you're it's generally when you have like event handlers like this on click where it gets messed up. So that's just one way you can go about doing it.
How is this class linking to the counter function, or is this just another exact replicate way to make the counter function.
Yeah, exactly. If I, if I was like gave you, like, I showed you this UI and I'd be like, make this component. Yeah, you could do it one of two ways. You could do it as a functional or you could do it as a class. So what I did was I wanted to do the functional component just so we could have like a reference. Oh, this is how you would write it as a functional component. And then this is how you would write it as a class component. Just so you can kind of compare and contrast the two. But yeah, and I've said this, when we use them, like elsewhere in our app, you don't really know the difference. They're going to be used the same. And in your UI, they look the same. There will be some little small details, but I think for now, we can just consider them being the same. Like class and functional components with hooks are essentially the same. Cool.
And so is the this keyword just referring to the counter class as a whole?
Yeah, this keyword, this is a object-oriented programming thing, and it's a JavaScript key. It's not, I mean, it's since we're using classes. If you remember from Ruby, when we used the self keyword, do you remember that?
Slightly.
Like it's the same thing. Ruby just decided to call it self, which actually I think is a better name. JavaScript and other languages call it this. So it's like referring, like if I came in and did like a class person, and then, James equals new person. Person dot getting Ruby and JavaScript next to person dot new. This keyword would refer to like the instance, so it would refer to like James, or if I had another instance than Bob, then it would be Bob would be like it's trying to convey like it's this instance of the class. It's the same thing in Ruby with the self keyword. It's like self is referring to the instance of the class. It's always fun to like try to explain the JavaScript's and like this keyword in JavaScript's a little hard to understand relatively compared to like Ruby. There's some like gotchas, like for example with like this dot not being bound in this kind of function, but it is in the other kind. So let's do another example. Let's go build out, because this is pretty like this counter example is pretty, it's probably one of the simpler components we can make. So let's of course just go do like a lovely like CRUD action. So hopefully like maybe you're feeling a little more comfortable with CRUD actions on the React side of things, but so hopefully this will be a little bit of a review, but then it's also going to be new because we're going to be using class components. And then also we're going to be throwing in React. Sorry, Semantic Ui React. So I'm going to be in Neo, there's this contacts list. This is what we're going to kind of be building. So I'll kind of be following this. So this is something, very similar to what we've done in the past, where, we're going to have a kind of just drawing this out we're going to have our app component. And in our app component, we're going to have a context component. And our context component is going to map over some contact components. And then we'll also have in our app, we'll have that render out a contact form. So we've done this before, we just haven't done it with class components. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So I'm not going to, we don't need to like regenerate this list. I'm just going to use this app. And, you know, you can leave your counters there if you want, or you can comment them out. But something we are going to do is, for this app, is we're going to use Semantic Ui React. So up until now, you've kind of been on your own with styling. You're kind of responsible for doing all the styling. But there's a lot of these CSS like frameworks out there. Have any of you heard of things like Bootstrap or Semantic or Material? Have you kind of seen those? What these things are is these are like CSS frameworks or just like CSS that's kind of written for you, where it has all this default styling. So you don't have to write any of the CSS. It gives you all this stuff out of the box for free. So there's those frameworks that are kind of independent of React, like Bootstrap and Material, but also a lot of these CSS frameworks have built React versions that is specific to React, which is really nice. So if we actually look at, so we're going to be using Semantic Ui React. And just like for demo, there's other ones at design. There's a lot of these. We'll kind of just look at what they are. So what this is a component library. And what it gives us is it gives us a lot of components just out of the box. For example, we'll have a button component. And these components are going to be pretty straightforward to use, but then it gives us nice little things like, you know, we can do icons, we can have different colors. There's like this nice just style to it. You know, that's a lot better than what you get just the default HTML, because default HTML is awful. But there's buttons, there's things like containers, there's dividers. So we can get all of these components just kind of easily built: flags, headers, icons. There's stuff with the images, inputs. Forms is where these really come up big. I mean, we could look at like form collections. So we get nice forms. We can get like checkboxes, submit buttons. And what we can do is we can kind of use these components as Legos. A lot of these systems will also have ways to like throw things into grids, and like where you can have like, you know, different columns, and it can be responsive, because they can make responsive design a lot easier. That can be pretty hard if you're doing that from scratch. But a lot of these, we can kind of have some grids, things like menus. So yeah, a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, there's quite a bit of things. So you want to modal, there you go. And yeah, like this is, we're going to be using Semantic. There's other component libraries out there. You're kind of free to use whatever you want. You'll kind of see that these are actually pretty straightforward to use. But yeah, here's another example. So it's definitely, it's just got different style. So you might pick a component library that kind of matches your use case. This one has a nice little time picker. You need to, for some reason, you know, have a nice time picker. date picker. So let's just stick with semantic though, and let's get this set up. So to get this set up, we need to add 2 libraries. So I'm going to go into my React app, do a yarn add semantic -ui -react. So that's the React library, but then I'm also going to add the CSS, semantic -ui -css. Hopefully I spelled those right. Those are the 2 that's the command I ran. Cool. And now one last thing I need to do in my index.js. And now that I'm going to be importing someone else's CSS, maybe I can just delete or in here, like comment out that. Maybe I might want to do my own custom CSS later. But for now, I'm just going to delete all of this CSS that's in my app CSS and my index CSS. Actually, I'm not going to import that. Actually, I could. Since it's blank, it really doesn't do anything. The important part, though, is I import semantic UI CSS. And then from here, I'm going to import semantic.min.css. So here, what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing that CSS file, the min CSS file. That's where all the semantic CSS lives. I'm going to import it into my app. You know, if I were to like comment this stuff out, go back to my app, get it working. I don't know if you can tell, but already just by importing that CSS, a couple things, like the text has changed a little. It's a different font, and also it's kind of got some different styles. So this CSS is being applied. Let's do this before we get into the CRUD. Let's just go and let's just create a component. Semantic demo.js. I'm just, since this is more about semantic, I'm just going to make this a functional component. Semantic demo. Demo. We can export default this. I can add this component here, and I'll just go ahead and get rid of these. I don't really need those anymore. I'll comment them out. All right, and then I'll grab my semantic demo component. Cool. So yeah, if I want to start using these components now, because what we can't really do, like I can't go through a whole Semantic UI React tutorial with you and go through all of these components. And then like on your final project, no one ends up using Semantic anyway, they go choose another one. So you're kind of free to use other libraries if you don't like Semantic. But let's say like I do want to use this modal. Actually, let's go with something maybe a little more simple to start out with. Like I want to use a button. Okay, so the nice thing about these documentation is it might give you an example of how to do it. And it also gives you a code sandbox link where you can like open up this demo in a code sandbox. And you can try it out there. But I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna do it from here. Take the button. And in my semantic demo, where is that? Use that button. Now I need to import it. And make sure you import it from Semantic UI React, not Semantic UI CSS. It has to be from Semantic UI React. So I want to use that component. I'm just going to import it from that library. There's my button. And yeah, a lot of this, I'm sure this still has, like, this is still just React. I can probably do a on click. So that's, you know, event handlers. Yeah, so I can just kind of go through and like, maybe I want, you know, this labeled icon. Well, how do I do that? It looks like I do a button component. You know, I can give it a label position prop, set that equal to right. Then I have an icon component. So I need to import the icon component. Go back. Now I have a button, you know, that has a right arrow icon. So these are this is why these component libraries are so nice. They give us, you know, these buttons, and notice like the button, it has things like when I hover over it, it goes to a hand, it has a hover effect. So it has like kind of these default things you would expect from a button, which is nice. Like when I click on it, it changes color. So, and that was very easy to do.
How did you do the import of the icon? Never mind. I saw it as a separate attribute.
Yeah, these are all going to be like, yeah, you can just separate them by commas. So yeah, like a form, we'll get more into forms today, but I think forms are like a big one. You know, you can kind of look at how they do a form. I think some of their examples are classes. So this is kind of why, like, you know, as you're going through this documentation, they might have some examples that are function components, but they also have some examples that are class components. So this is kind of why we need to maybe learn a little about class components, just so we can kind of make sense of what's going on.
Hey, James, just before I battle this too much, I'm getting an error that says it can't find the semantic UI CSS thing when I try to import it in the index.
Okay, so That'd be one of two things. And it's probably a spelling error somewhere, or maybe, let me just select these two things out. So to add semantic, I'll throw this in Slack. So there's that first command. And then in index.js. Add this. So I would maybe double check the spelling on your yarn add. If you spelled that, that needs to be Semantic UI CSS. And then on your import, we're importing Semantic UI CSS, semantic min.css. And we can actually go look at that because remember, if we're importing from, if we don't have a relative path, that's going to be in our node modules. So if I go to node modules, there should be a semantic UI CSS in here. It's crazy how big this thing gets. And then, so there's that folder. And then from there, we're importing this semantic.min.css. And there's all the CSS. There's also a semantic.css file that's probably going to be a lot more readable. But just so like you might see this, these .min files, what the .min files do is, and why we use them is they'll go through and they'll go remove all of the unnecessary text. Because like your computer doesn't care about these spaces. So this kind of can save a little bit of space. You can just get rid of everything, all unneeded spaces and line breaks. But yeah, would be impossible to read. This would be so hard to read as a human, but the computer doesn't care. What about now, Mike? Did that get it working?
Yeah, I actually don't know what I did wrong because I just reran the yarn add, but I spelled it the same way, and I don't know, it worked this time, so I'm not gonna complain.
Okay, cool. Sweet. So let's just maybe like leave the semantic demo here if we want to like just test out some more components. But I think this is essentially the idea of semantic. Like, ooh, I want, like, say I want this card. Just kind of look at how they do it. That's not going to be the right image, but then I would just need to like import the things that I need to use. So like I'm using a card, so let's import that. I'm using an image, so import that. What else? I think I have everything else. Save it. And now I have the card. Now I didn't give that a valid URL. That is not it. I don't have that file, so that's why that's not working. But you can kind of see like it's working. I could go like open image in a new tab. I could go pull this URL. And just like that, now I have this nice little card. That took me like zero, like that was like a minute. If I were trying to design this, that would take a second. You know, that'd take a while. So this is why semantic's nice. It's going to give us nice, and another thing with semantic and like these CSS frameworks is they give you that consistency. you're definitely going to have like like your app's going to kind of have like this semantic vibe. Or if you were to use a different component library like Ant Design, you know, they're going to have its own feel. So let's go do our contact list. I want to see if we're going to. Yeah, let's just do this in our app. So in my app.js, I'm going to make this so this is a functional component right now. So let's make this a class component. So to make this a class component, I'm going to say class app extends React component. Make sure that auto imported React for me. And that's no longer, I don't need that there anymore. And now that it's a class, I need the render function. My render function, that's where I'm going to wrap that all my return in my render statement. My imports are going to be the same. My JSX should be the same. If I go back, it's working. So yeah, if there's not any state or any like the life cycle methods, then there's not so much of a difference. Cool. Just another thing. So sorry. Let's come in here. We're going to create some state. So last time we did that in the constructor, right, where we had props. We did super props. We said like this dot state. Because what we're going to do is we're going to create some contacts. We're going to have some contact state. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to comment this out. Just say one way to create initial state. Or there's actually a kind of, it's a newer feature. It's fairly common now. I could just do it like this. I can just create my object like that. I don't need the this keyword. It's kind of like I don't need this dot render. I can just come up here and create this state object right here. So these two ways do the exact same thing. They're, you know, creating initial state with a contacts array. And with the React and with class components, I can have whatever I want here. I could have contact state. I could have like a, you know, loading state. Whatever I want, I can just throw in this state object. It's all going to live in this dot state. With remember use state, we might use that hook a couple times. Use state, use that like 5 or 10 times. With class components, all our state lives in this one object. Cool. And I'm just going to go ahead and slack out this contacts array so we don't have to type it. Because we're not going to be using a database, so I just want some dummy data. So for my contacts, instead of making that an empty array at the start, we're just going to throw in some contacts in there. And for now, I'm also going to get rid of that other data, so we're not going to be using it. So I have state. State is an object, has a key, context, which is an array of objects. I'm also just going to get rid of this demo for now, comment it out. So we're going to have a context component that we need to create. Now this is going to, this is going to have a context prop. And then I'm going to set that value equal to this dot state dot context. Now I have not created this component, so I need to do that. New file context. So import React from React. And we're gonna just get some practice writing some class components. So contacts extends React.component. We need a render function. And our render function will just returns our JSX. There's actually a header component from Semantic. So maybe try using that context. And maybe instead of using a div, I don't know, maybe we could try using like a container. Or actually, let's wrap our whole app.js. Let's wrap this in a container from Semantic. And then I need to import my context component. So I import contacts. I'm also using, now I'm using this container component from Semantic UI React. So if I look at this, there we go. And now I can see like that, well, all that container component is doing, it's just giving me a little like margin or padding on the side. Cool. So just going back to my app.js. So we're passing my contacts component, this context prop, which is going to be equal to this .state.context. So in my contacts, now, you know, we could do something like this. Let's do a render. It's kind of like we've been doing it, render contacts. Except render. So I'm going to call this function and I'm going to define it up here. render contacts. So, but since this is a class component, I'm not going to use const here. I'm going to use, I don't need anything right there, or function, I don't need that. I do need to say this dot render contacts. There, I can return this dot props, because this component is getting past contacts. And then I can just map over those. Let's just go through each contact for now, just to see if this is working. Do paragraph, like, I don't know, contact dot ID. One, two, three. Okay. So yeah, what I want to do is I don't want to, I'm gonna, if we kind of like when we looked at our diagram, we had a contact component. So let's go ahead, let's create that contact.js. Let's get some more practice. Class contact extends React dot component. I need to import React now. And then here, like the same thing, render. I need my render function. Could do that as an arrow function or not. So yeah, let me, I know I tell you to use arrow functions, just sometimes see me not use them. But just to go back here to this context, see how this keyword's defined there. This isn't an arrow function. So this is, I think, why it's confusing when you're like using class components. It's like, well, all this, like sometimes this is defined, but then once you do the on click, then all of a sudden it's not. So yeah, if you really want to avoid that, just always use arrow functions everywhere. But like our render doesn't really need that. But does that make, like, both of these are valid ways to write functions? Just be wary of how this keyword might get kind of destroyed. And if you want to be safe, just always use the arrow function.
Where did you have the original contacts list again?
That's in my app.js. So up here in my app, my class app, I have state. And inside of there, inside of that object, I have this contacts array. And then when I render my contacts component, I pass it down as a context prop. And there's the value, this .state.contacts. And now in my contacts component, I can grab those contacts through props. All right, so if we're, let me see how we did this in the notes. I'm just going to slack this out. Okay, so here's, because this is just from Semantic. Now there's a lot of ways we can now render this. We could maybe do, like we were looking at the cards. We could do contacts as cards, but for this example, we're going to do it as a table. So what I'm going to throw here is this. I'm just going to, I think I threw the whole component in there. That's a functional component. That's fine. Let's just write this as a functional component. Because this really, this component really isn't doing much. It just is kind of rendering out this table row. And if I wanted, and I'll select this out too, just so you kind of have the contrast, I'll make this as a class component really quick. So now you can see the comparison. I need curly brackets for my class. So in the example, we're pulling name and phone from props in our function. So now to get name and phone, I need to do this dot props dot name. My phone is going to be this dot props dot phone. Let's see what this looks like, if that even works. Okay, so now what I need to do, oh yeah, sorry, I said it, check this out. Don't need that. So now, see, my contact is just one table row. If I go to my contacts, and this can kind of be where it's nice to separate these two, because especially if you're working with like tables and semantic, it can get a little messy. So for this contacts, I'm going to select this one out as well, because this is a little messy. So what I'm going to do is, so I have this table component. We'll just kind of look at it. Slash table. Get rid of this. I'm missing something. Oh, I need the table right here. Okay. So here's my contacts page. And this can be like, I think this gets to be a little tricky thing when working with libraries like Semantic, is getting, the formatting correct. But we'll look at this. Let's just get this working, and then I'll kind of show you maybe ways to kind of think about how I need to solve this problem. So what I have here is I have a semantic table. So these are just the headers. And then in my body, what I'm going to do is I'm going to render contacts. So that's where I go through all my contacts and I map over them. And I return the JSX for one contact. Now, if I look here, these are expecting a name prop and a phone prop. Well, let's just pass those down. I'm getting this error. I have a couple errors. My render method should have a return statement. Yep, this doesn't have it. This needs to say return. that, so I'm going to update that in Slack, because that's not correct. All right, and then I have now tables not defined in my contacts. So I need to make sure I import that from Semantic. And there we go. Let me Slack this one out. So I think, sorry, excuse me. When working with Semantic or these third-party libraries and you're trying to do maybe like a little more complicated UI like this, where we have, you know, the name and phone number and then some options. Like, how would you do this? I kind of wanted to get this showing up and then we can kind of like redesign it from in a different way. Because I kind of just slacked you out the code and was like, here you go. But let's say you maybe got like in Figma or a wireframe, someone says, hey, this is what I want this to look like. You know, I want a table with these 3 columns, and this options column is going to have some buttons. So what I would do is, well, I would go to, it's first like this looks, this is a table. So I would go to Semantic and I would go look at their table examples. You know, could I find an example that's like close to what I'm trying to get? It's probably not going to be exact, but I think this first one matches pretty well. Right? If I go back, that first one kind of has like the similar look. It doesn't have the buttons there, but it's close enough. And where I'd like to, and it also has this pagination thing, which I don't want, but it's a good starting point. So what I like to do, and like these libraries that links to like Code Sandbox or, you know, places where you can go explore, I think this makes this really useful. So what I can do is I can like open this up in Code Sandbox. And here I can start trying to create what I'm trying, like the thing that actually works for me. So I can use this as a starting point and then get it working. So for instance, like I said, I don't need the pagination. So let's just get rid of this footer, see if that does it. Like it's rid of that. I mean, this is a little weird because it's got some responsive stuff going on. So I don't have that much room to work with. But yeah, I don't want that ribbon, so I could just get rid of that. And then I'd see here, well, I don't want header. I want it to say, what like I have name, phone, and options. So I could change that here. Name, phone, options. Cool. So there I can kind of like, there's that. And here I don't want, you know, text, I want a button. So I could just say, okay, can I just throw in a button here? That's not imported, so I need to import button. like, I don't know, add or delete. Oh, like that's in the wrong cell. I need that here. But just using kind of this hard-coded data, I can kind of see what, you know, my code's going to look like. So maybe eventually I want like an edit button in here too. Like that could be color blue. This could be color, actually that should be probably red. Like I really just care about how I draw like one table row. But the point here is, and I think this is really going to help you out when you're working with these libraries. Like I'm not trying to like map over my data right now. I'm not trying to make this work with my data. I'm just trying to get this to look the way I want it with just some dummy values. And then, yeah, if I'm trying to figure out like, well, how do I do the mapping? Well, I think that's just going to be another table row. Oh, so this is when I do my map function, that's what I need to create when I'm like going through each contact. So let me do this, because now let's pretend like I don't have this table stuff anymore. I'm going to delete that. I'm also going to delete this. Just so I can kind of work my way backwards. So what I do is then I just can copy this code that I created that I know is working. And then I would throw this in here like, okay, there's that. Let's maybe do a couple table rows. So now it's in my project. And even once again, before I start to map, I'm going to test it out. I'm just going to get it working. Like I forgot to import button. Okay, cool. Sweet. So now I have like this hard-coded version of it in my app. Now I can try to do like the mapping part. So I'd be like, well, this is, I would say, okay, this is what I think I want for my contact. So I'm going to take this out, throw this in my contact form. And then here, you know, is where I can do my render contacts function. And, you know, I could even keep it like still test again, like it's not rendering the values, but hey, it's rendering 3 rows. Cool. That's working. Now I can do the last step of actually putting in the appropriate values. So this would be this dot props dot name. This dot props dot phone. And there we go. So I think, especially if you're a little unfamiliar with these libraries, just trying to creating this place in like I said, Code Sandbox, where you can try to get it to match your use case. Because it's probably going to be a little rare that you go in and you find something that matches exactly what you need. But you know, you can kind of change it to maybe match your needs. So if you're like editing a card you know, maybe you don't care if there's an image and you just want like the phone number here. Good, and you don't care about that stuff. So you can go in here and just like switch it up. Well, how do I maybe do this? Like, what does this look like if I throw this in, like, maybe I want to make that a list. Let's try, like, here's a group of cards. It's like they just have this card group component. So I could be like, okay, let's go add that here, see what this looks like. And that, you know, that could be another option. So then I'd be like, okay, sweet, I figured out how to render these as cards. So I might go to my contacts, be like, okay, let's do this as a card group. And then we could, yeah, do this dot render contacts. And then my contact, instead of doing it like this, instead of doing the table row, I could then take this one card component. Put that there. That's going to be this dot props. Dot name. And the phone be this dot props dot phone. And then I can go see if that's what that's looking at. The card's not defined. Okay, let's import card. And now that's how that would look like cards. Probably can't mix. Like I probably can't do something like this. I don't know what this is gonna look like. Tried to do like I'm doing a table header, but then rendering cards. Like, yeah, that's gonna come out a little weird. But it's trying to like match them together. But does that, this is more like, this is like, I think when I talk about semantic, I don't like talking about here's how you make a table or here's how you do a card. It's kind of like, you are kind of like a chef and like you're given ingredients and, or like, it's almost like, once again, like a DJ, you're like kind of picking and choosing the parts you want. And you kind of got to mix and match and kind of get these working together. They're just kind of giving you some like ideas, like here's what a card could look like, but you can go in and you can kind of customize these things to match your needs. But we'll stick with the table, I guess. Let's go back to doing the table. Just comment those out so those can be in the code if you want to look at them. Any questions? I think this is a good time for a break. I'm going to add this and push up to GitHub. Cool. All right. Yeah, let's just come back at, let's call it 12. Let's just take a quicker break, 12:10. We'll go from there. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's get started. So I think the next thing we have our show, we're showing this data. The next thing we're going to do is our form. So I think this is going to be a little different than what we're used to, since we're not doing a class functional component. So let's go ahead and first just render this. So let's make a contact form component. And all right. Class contact form extends React.component. We'll do our render method. We'll just return some div. Let's do a header from semantic. Let's say contact form. All right, and then let's just export contact form. Let's put that in our app.js, maybe above. Contact form. There's like a divide or something, a divider component. So maybe give us a line between the two. So import divide, import our contact form into our app. There we go. So there's our contact form. You know, I could right here, I can still do like inline style. If I wanted like some margin top. Okay, so let's let's start working on this form. So first of all, yeah, likewise, kind of like that same strategy, maybe going to Semantic UI and looking at their form. Now, I will give you a warning. I think sometimes the form information can kind of be a little hard to find on here, but there's things like up here where you can like show props. If you toggle this switch on any of the components, that kind of shows you like what props you can give to a form. There's some demos. The demos are not sometimes the best, especially with the forms, because they don't have the like on change handlers. I mean, here's one that like, you know, might show you how to do it with a select, but I still think it's missing. Missing the on change. And there's kind of like different ways to work with these forms. There's also up here, there's like, so there's like radio buttons, there's select text areas. So we want just some basic inputs. But man, yeah, like I said, it's just the documentation on the forms is a little different. I might go off the notes a little. So let's just maybe kind of do that same thing where we open this up in Code Sandbox. maybe try to get this working here. So we do have like a name and a phone. They're just using a regular like input element. So there's another way to do this is we can do like a form dot input. And then this one can have like a label equals. So these two are like, they're kind of doing the same thing. The form input's nice because this has other things, like this has other props that this one doesn't. So I'm going to kind of just do it this way instead of the way they have it. I mean, there is a form input, like it is part of their library. Like I said, I don't know why it's like so hard to find. Like I'm on their form input component. Why is it not showing me like an example of it? So there's just a lot of different ways to do this. So we'll give it a label. Likewise, it's going to be very similar to our other things where we give it a value, you know, where that's going to show up there, value. We can have our on change. No, this is not leave. So I'm just going to take this as is and just plop this in my semantic already, because this example is also a function component. I want this to be a class. Cool. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start writing some code. So I'm going to create some state for my inputs. So I'm going to have, we have name and phone. And I'm just going to set those equal by default to empty strings. And then the values is going to be this dot state dot name. Value here will be this dot state dot phone. Now, this is also going to be a little different than how we've done things. I'm going to create a function to handle this. I'm going to call it handle change. And let's just do our, what do I need to make sure these match. This is going to be our name. This will be our, okay. We don't need this checkbox. So I'm going to refresh. Looks like I'm not defining any of these. So let's import form and our button. And save. There we go. So now we have our name and phone. Cool. So let's start working on this handle change and see what's going on here. Handle change. I'm just going to console.log e. Cool. So I have this handle change function that is going to get this event, and then we're just going to log it. That's all it's going to do right now. And that's on my name field. So if I go to my name, start typing stuff, I get this synthetic base event. Let's see, do I have the target on here? See how this e.target.value, that's what we did in the previous, we set it to e.target.value, nothing new there. Let's log that. I go back to my console. Now when I type a button in here, that's what it's logging. It's logging whatever key I click. It's not coming up here because here I need to set my state. So say this dot set state. So here I want to set, my name to e.target.value. Sweet. So now when I type, it's getting changed. So my state is setting. So I could do the same thing for this input, for the phone input. Where they're both calling this handle change. But now if I type on my phone, it's going to change my name. So what I want to have happen is I want this handle change to be able to handle both of these changes. So what I'm going to give these, I'm going to give these both a name prop, and I'm going to set it equal to the name of the attribute. So this one's phone, so I'm going to give this name lowercase phone. And for this input, give the name attributes, which also happens to be name. And now here, I'm going to log this. e.target.value. And I'm also going to log e.target.name. So if I click on my phone and I type a button, see how the e.target.name is phone. And if I click on the name, e.target is name. e.target.name is name. So what I want, because now really what I want this, when I set the state, if someone's clicking the name input, I want that to say name. If someone's doing the phone input, I want that to say phone, right? So let's solve this one way. Let's do this. If e.target.name equals phone, then we'll set phone. And then I could do like a, if e.target.name equals name, we could do it that way. See if this works. Why is that? Oh, that's setting both of them. What am I doing out here? Oh, anyone see it? I just saw it. So both of these are running because that was a single equal. So that's just going to assign that value there, which weirdly that returns a truthy value, so that runs. I need to do a double or triple equal there. And then now when I click on name, it's there, or when I click on the phone, it's there. So now I can edit those differently. but I'm going to comment this out. There's a cleaner way to do this. I can just say this dot set state. Now, if I want to, there's a syntax. If I want to access, if I want to have the key of my object be a variable, I can put that in curly brackets. E dot, and once I type this out, maybe it'll make a little more sense. Target dot name. And then the value is going to be e dot target dot value. So what this syntax allows me to do is it allows me to have a key that's a variable. So when e.target.name is my phone key, behind the scenes, it's going to evaluate and then it's going to become phone. Just like it is up here. When my name one's clicked, then that evaluates to be name. But now I can have that, be either or. So I don't have to do this long if statement, because what if I had like 5 other inputs? That if statement would get pretty long. But this way, I can say, hey, just give me the name. And this e.target.name matches whatever you called it here. So like this name is lowercase phone. And you're going to want to give these names that match what you're keeping track of them in state. So I have lowercase name, lowercase phone, lowercase name, lowercase phone. And then if we try that, there we go. So you can do that. So now we have a submit. So this form component, this has a on submit handle submit. Handle, oh, sorry. Handle submit. I'm definitely going to do this one as an arrow function because this is an event handler. And I don't want this keyword to get screwed up. So what I mean, let's do a console.log this. I just really care about the state. I want to log this dot state in my handle submit. So handle submit, what this errors, handle submit is not defined, line 24. So line 24, handle submit's not defined, which is true because I need to call this dot handle submit. So now if I click submit, I'm logging my state. If I don't have the arrow function here, let's do a normal ES5 function syntax. All of a sudden, this is undefined. So that would give you issues. So if I try to do like this dot state dot name, because this is the error you're probably going to see more often. This is when it's break. This is the error you're going to see. Can't read properties of undefined reading name. So if you see this can't read properties of undefined, and then you're seeing this error occurring where it's like this dot state, that should maybe be a hint that you need to use an arrow function or bind this to the function. So now I switch that back to an arrow function. And now it's working. Cool. So yeah, this is where we're going to want to, add values from form. to UI. And we're skipping DB step. So not a DB. So what I can do is I want to do this in my app.js because that's where my state lives. So it's still the same idea where I'm going to want to do a add contact function here. This function should probably take a contact. And likewise, I kind of want to do, it's the same rules of like, it might be tempting just to say like this dot state dot contacts dot push contact. But that would mutate this original state. So we always, it's kind of like the same thing when we're working with functional components. We need to create new state. So I would say const new contacts. So this is going to be very similar. I just take the contact. Like I'm creating a new array where I put the contact on first, and then I just spread out over my contacts. Well, my contacts is this dot state dot contacts. And then I can call set state. Set that equal to my new contacts. So very similar to how we've been doing this. And then now with this add contact, I just need to pass this to my contact form. Add contact that's the name of the prop. The value is going to be the function, this dot add contact. And then in my contact form, now my handle submit, I can do a this dot props dot add contact and pass it this dot state. Or, I could, maybe I'm going to have more stuff in state. So I could say name is equal to this dot state dot name, and phone could be equal to this dot state dot phone. I can also, if I want to, I can destructure if you don't like how this is looking. I could destructure these things from this dot state. Clean this up. Well, now that those keys are the same, I can now do it like that. So destructuring is an option. But if like right, I would say this would be the cleaner way to do it. But if right now, if this makes it more readable right now, I would say just code this however it's more readable to you. Because this can be nice because it's really showing, the name key, the value is this dot state dot name. The phone key is this dot state dot phone. So it's pretty explicit. I might also there's an ID. So I could just do like a math.random. Give that an ID. Since we're not working with the database, I can just kind of create a random ID. Go to my name. So Joel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, submit. And there we go. There's Joe. Something I might want to do with my form after we're done submitting, I could do a this dot set state. Set name to blank and phone to blank. just to show you this, like, let's say we want like, maybe for this form, we want there to be, I don't know, like some toggle state. Or like show. So let's default that to true. So I can just add state. And maybe I have a button here. If this dot state dot show, if that's true, I'm going to say hide, because that'll be like, let them know they can hide it, or I could say show. Close that off. So it said hide. We can have on click this dot toggle form. So then I can come make a toggle form function. It's an arrow function because this is on a event handler. Just say this dot set state. What did I call it? Show. To be not this dot state dot show. So when I call the this dot set state, like I don't have to put all the things I want to update. I can just give it the keys that I need to update, and it'll keep the if the other keys are not in there, it'll just keep them the same. So like I have this show state, so I can do my name. I'll start typing a name and a number. I hide my, I gotta actually get this set up so it works. Let's do this show and this whole form. And then wrap that in parentheses. Sorry, yeah, it's not show, it's this dot state dot show. So now I can hide that form, but yeah, it's not gonna, me toggling the form is not gonna like get rid of those values. They're still gonna be there. Let me Slack this out. Any questions on this? That is the wrong. Let's see here. Let's do the delete. So with our delete, once again, this really isn't going to change much. Just to kind of show you these, it's kind of the same idea where, we have our delete button in our contact, but our state lives in our app.js for our contacts. So we're going to do a delete contact function here. And yeah, maybe that takes an ID. So we can do something like this, const filtered contacts. Just take our state, this dot contacts, this dot state dot contacts dot filter, do our filter function, go through each of our contacts. Does the contact ID, as long as it doesn't match the ID that was given to this function, then that function will return true and we'll keep the contact in this new array. And then once we go through all of our contacts, then we can set our state. Contacts to be I should call that filtered contacts. And now with this delete contact, I need to pass this down. Through my contacts, this dot delete contact. All right, so there's my delete contact function. I'm just filtering over my contacts, setting the state. In my contacts, I then pass that down. So then in my contacts, I just need to, once again, pass that on down to my contact component. So delete contact is going to be equal to this dot props dot delete contact. So now finally on my delete, I can do the on click. Delete, or sorry, this dot props dot delete contact, and pass it the ID, this dot props dot ID. Now see, this is where this is maybe getting, I think, a little hard to read because we're always saying this dot props, this dot props. So this is where like destructuring can, probably clean this up quite a bit. So I'm going to take name and phone from this dot props. And I'm going to do that within my render function. Now I don't have to say this dot props dot name, this dot props dot phone. I can also grab my delete contact function off of there. And the ID. And clean that up. And then wrap that in that function.
Whenever you did the ID, when you put it in the information for adding a contact, you put ID in there. Does that make it generate a random number for the ID? Like, since we're not doing a seeds file, that would automatically generate an ID number.
Yeah, I'm just trying, where did I do that? Right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, math.random.
Oh, you did a let ID. Okay, I missed that part.
Yeah, and just so you can see, if I run in node, math.random gives you a number between 0 and 1. It's kind of a weird, I mean, it's not really weird, but just, it's not as friendly as like Ruby. But if, let's say if I don't want to have this, let's say I want to generate like a random number in JavaScript that is between like 1 and 1,000,000 or 1 and 1,000. I don't really care. How do I do that? And I can only use math.random. Like there's not like another function. There are other functions we can that we'll use to help with this, but there's not like another random function.
Times it by 1,000 or whatever your maximum.
Yeah, so we could times it by however high we want to go. And that's going to give us, random from 0 to, that number. Now, if I want to get rid of, this decimal, I could round. So there's a couple of ways we can round. We can do a math.floor. And let's just do like, let's just go up to like 3. So it's a pretty small range. So math.floor is going to take the number and then round down no matter what. So if it was like 0.9, math.floor would just round to 0. So if I do math.random times 3, that's going, or math.random times 3, that's going to give me a number between 0 and 2. I just lost that. Let's say I wanted to do 1 to 3. I mean, I could add 1. That's, I could just say, hey, add 1 to that. That would give me 1 to 3. I could also use like, I forget what it's called. Is it seal? Sealing? It's sealing. I don't. Yes, seal. It's called sealing. So that's kind of the opposite of floor, where it's always going to round up. So yeah, if I wanted to come in here and make a nice like odd number or like an integer and have it be like huge, I could just do that. So that will give me 1 up to this number. Okay. So side note. So let's now go. Actually, this should be working because just to review, we have our delete contact function, which removes it from our state and then sets our state. But we need to pass this function all the way down through our contacts. And then from our contacts, we're going to pass it to our contact. And then we call it right here on click delete contact, pass the ID. Cool. So let's try that. Oh crap, what? Are they all gone? I don't know why they were all gone there for a second. But now our, I mean, if I refresh, like there's no database, but so now our delete's working. Questions on that? I think for now we didn't really talk about update. Likewise with update, different ways we could do this. You could maybe try doing a modal, but let me just show you this one thing with update. And then we can call it. So what I'd want to do is let's maybe, I don't know how this is going to look. If we throw on a contact form here, this might look horrible. Actually, that's not too bad. Not the best UI, but it works. So let's do this. Let's just try to figure out how do we give our, like, how do we get our data to our form? So likewise, I could, pass all of these props down. So name equals name, ID equals ID, and phone equals phone. So I'm destructuring these variables right up here from props. I could probably just also do this, spread out over this dot props. That would do the same thing. So now let's go to our contact form. So a couple things we'd want to do. So first of all, with our initial state, we could do a check. This.props.name ? So let's see, hey, do we have this.props.name? If we do, use .value. If not, use an empty string. Could do the same thing for phone. Props.phone. If we have that, let's use it. If not, we'll use an empty string. Just using my ternary there. Go to my form. So there are my values for my edits, and my new form doesn't have the values. And likewise with my handle submit, I could do something like this. If not, like check to see if I have this.props.id. If I don't have an ID, that's going to be add. If I do, then this is going to be your update. It looks something like, and actually this dot set state, I'd want to clear that anyway on both of them. Now let's just leave that where it is. But with this, you do our update, probably be called something like this dot update contact. But I probably still would want to send in the ID. So it'd have it this dot props.id. Since I'm not pulling that from the database, probably would want to send it. But obviously this update contact's not defined. We haven't done it. But that would more or less be the same on how you've been doing update contact. You just need to create that update contact function here, then pass it to your contacts, pass it to your contact, and then pass it here to your contact form. So I am going to, but I think this is a good place to end. I'm going to add this and push it. Are there any questions? I just love it when maybe you're getting a little familiar with React and then it's just like, oh, here's a completely different way to do it. To do the same thing, more or less. So yeah, I really do try to avoid that. I might show you once or twice, like here's a different way to do it, but I'll just try to stick with one way. But I think with like React and with class components, it's, since like the hook feature is a little newer, I think it's one you kind of need to know. And really, hopefully you at least saw like the syntax is different, but how React is working is, it's kind of like the same ideas. It's just a little different with, especially with how you get like props and state. You have to get it. It's like this keyword. And you have this set state function, you have a render function, but other than that, it's pretty much very, very similar ideas. So Yeah, I think I can just even go over the homework right now while we got some time, and I'll release it. So if you want to, you can get started working on it. So for the homework, I think it is this one. So yeah, you're just gonna do a React music list app that lists songs with the name and artist. So very similar to what we did today. You can add more stuff if you want. That's kind of like the minimums. So do create, read, and delete actions. Use class components. This is definitely a use class components. We didn't really talk about these methods, so maybe I'll throw that as a bonus. If you want to look up those on your own. We will talk more about these messages though, or these methods. So add Semantic Ui React. I would say, spend some time with, looking into Semantic UI React, like experiment. Go try out some of those components. Guess I have that down here, but yeah. So as far as bonus, you can look into component did mount, component did update. Let me spell these right. And component will unmount methods. You can try doing update. And you can also try, if you get done, maybe go rewrite your components as functional components, just to compare and contrast. I think that might be helpful. I think that would probably be a good one to do on some of them. And then bonus, like if you really want to, you can add a Rails backend. I'd say that's kind of, don't worry about that. Cool. And this will just be individual. We'll throw you into like rooms, but this will be an individual assignment. And let me change the due date on this. Any questions on that? Have this due tomorrow. Sweet. Well, that is it for me. So if you have no questions, enjoy your lunch and let's meet back at 2 o'clock. See y'all later.